It's time for Security Now with Steve Gibson. Malware that uses social media as a command and control node. Microsoft has a new malware vulnerability in their malware vulnerability engine. The fastest way to lose more than $30,000 in bitcoins. And you know how you tell your friends and family just not to click on anything suspicious? Yeah, that's not good enough anymore. Security Now is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 616, recorded June 13th, 2017. Things are getting worse. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by CloudFlare. More than 6 million websites, apps, APIs, and SaaS companies use CloudFlare services to weather whatever the internet throws at them. For a free online chat session with a CloudFlare support engineer, visit cloudflare.com/twit. And by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully, so that you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/securitynow. And by Blue Apron, the #1 fresh ingredient and recipe delivery service in the country. See what's on the menu this week and get 3 meals free with your first purchase and free shipping by going to blueapron.com/securitynow. This is Security Now, where the only thing to fear is fear itself, and of course everything else that could potentially destroy your digital life. When the dark forces of insecurity gather up their exploits and breach toolkits, that's when we bring on this man. That's right, Steve Gibson. He is the big brain behind Gibson Research, Shields Up, Spinrite, and Squirrel, the man who can relieve you of your fear with a healthy dose of warranted paranoia. I'm Father Robert Ballester, the digital Jesuit, in for Leo Laporte. Steve, it's so good to see you, my friend.
Well, likewise, for our second of our 2 weeks together, while Leo's off gallivanting around the Galapagos, I guess. So this was sort of a different week. You know that last week podcast we titled I think it was Legacy's Long Tail. And looking over what we had to talk about this week, I sort of had metaphorically my face in my hands and just decided, okay, we just have to call this one Things Are Getting Worse. Because I think the forces of security are losing this battle. We're going to discuss a clever malware, which is, and we're going to look at the technology of this because it's insidious. It's hiding its intercommunications within social media posting comments. We've got a leaked NSA document about the Russian election hacking and how they bypassed, unquote, two-factor authentication where that was in place. So, whoops, not quite providing the security that we were hoping. Meanwhile, other Russian hackers are leveraging Google's own infrastructure to hide their spoofed websites. Tavis, our friend Tavis Ormandy, of course, with Google's Project Zero, has found additional problems with Microsoft's anti-malware protection engine. And we'll remember that in May, there was an emergency out-of-cycle update to fix something that he had found, because the last thing you want is the anti-malware filter, which is ubiquitous across Microsoft's platforms, to have a remotely exploitable vulnerability, which is what he found, and Microsoft immediately fixed. Well, there's another one. We also have cryptocurrency stealing malware, more concerns over widespread internet-connected camera design, malware found to be exploiting Intel's AMT motherboard features, which is a concern we've been talking about on this podcast now for a couple years. The idea that there's this off-the-map processor which is in the chipset, but which is undocumented or very, very underdocumented, and stays on even when the system is off. And I know you with your other podcast focusing on enterprise computing have looked at this a lot, Padre.
Oh yeah.
Then we also have a new danger of mouse cursor hovering. No longer is it enough not to click on the link. Turns out you can't even hover over a link. Then there's Apple's somewhat questionable iCloud sync security claims. The news of Azure changing their certificate authority to one that may not surprise our listeners of the podcast, and we have a bunch of catch-up miscellany and some closing the loop feedback with our listeners. So I think another jam-packed couple hours.
You know, Steve, one of these days I'm going to sub in for Leo, and you're just going to say, hey, you know what? We've solved everything. There's no security. Let's all go home.
Good night. Yes.
That will not be this week.
Actually, here we are at episode 616 in our 12th year. And Leo and I, when he initially proposed this, I had flown up to Toronto to do a day's worth of recordings for Call for Help. During the pause between shows, because we did like 4 in one day, we were just sort of kicking back while they rewound their VCRs. I mean, things were going to tape back then, and he said, "What would you think about doing a weekly podcast, maybe like 15 minutes on security?" And I said, "A what cast?" Because I had never heard the term before. And I remember thinking, oh, please don't bring that up again, because it just sounded like more than I needed. Well, needless to say, it's been a significant win for everybody. Our listeners appreciate pulling the week's events together, finding the top ones. And I need to remind everyone that it's my Twitter followers and those who even don't follow, but who send me tweets of things that they see occurring that they would like this podcast to cover, that, I go through the entire prior week, pulling topics together, and filtering through what I think are the most significant events. So, I mean, it really is an interactive driven podcast for which I am very grateful.
What's very kind of sad, Steve? It's the fact that as we move forward, we see new security vulnerabilities, new exploits, but the old ones never go away. They're always sticking around in some form or another. In fact, I just got rid of a conflicker infestation at the school that I live at. And I'm thinking, conflicker? What systems do we even have that are so vulnerable to that? And sure enough, there were some old student computers that were, and they were hammering the network. And I'm thinking, this is pretty much what happens in security, where all we do is add new ones. We never get rid of the old ones.
Well, and, back in the early days when it was sort of quaint to capture packets that were like out on the public internet, I coined the term IBR, Internet Background Radiation, because I realized that this stuff was never going to go away. There's all this good traffic, point-to-point, intentional, intended, deliberate traffic, but there's also this underlying hiss of background radiation, which are packets coming from people's closets on, increasingly now, unfortunately, IP-connected cameras, but, VCRs, routers that have been compromised. So now we have all this IoT problem and growth from that. But back in the day, as they say, it used to be servers that had long been forgotten that would get compromised and then would never get rebooted. And so they'd get, MS Blast infected, and then that infestation or that infection would then start in turn scanning the internet, and so thus creating a background of radiation such that if any vulnerable machine happened to pop up on the public IPv4 space before long, if it had any vulnerabilities that hadn't been fixed, it would get commandeered. And
5 years
the world
ago,
we live in today.
5 years ago, when I was still working with Interop, we own the Class A. It was the 45.Class A in IPv4.
Nice.
And anytime we lit it up at any show, almost immediately at least a gigabit of noise. And remember, this was 5 years ago, so that was a whole heck of a lot. We had to block it upstream. And that was just all the automated scanning because our range only came up during the shows. But it was one of those things where you're like, wow, there's no humans involved here. These are just machines that just keep scanning the same address ranges over and over again.
Well, and there was that CAIDA group, CAIDA. They also maintained large blocks of space that had never had any IPs assigned, and they DDoS attacks by picking up the reflected packets because attackers were spoofing their source SYN packets. They would be bouncing off of machines under attack, and then those that happened because the source IPs were randomly generated, all of the ones that happened to fall within their unallocated block of IPs would come in with the IP of the remote target attack that was doing everything it could to respond to the inbound spoofed SYNs with SYNACs. So they were able to give us our first look at the early days of DOS and DDoS attacks of given sites by looking at the traffic reflected from them into blocks of IP space. Thus, yet another form of internet background radiation.
I love this. Unfortunately, we could go forever. We could just do the whole internet networking nostalgia. We don't want to do that. We want to push forward, Steve. But before we do that, do you mind if we take a little break to pay some bills?
Let's do it.
All right. So this episode of Security Now, speaking of security, is brought to you by CloudFlare. Now, CloudFlare is on a mission. They want to build a better internet. They make your site or app faster, safer, and more reliable so that you can stop worrying about slow loading page times, downtime, or getting hacked, and instead focus on what you do best, building a great site, service, or product. Now, CloudFlare is incredibly easy to use, and sign-up takes less than 5 minutes. CloudFlare's global network of 115-plus data centers caches your content and moves it closer to your visitors. The web optimization feature speeds up your code and makes it mobile responsive. And end-to-end, CloudFlare speeds up every request to your site with performant DNS, caching, content optimization, load balancing, and more. You want to make your site, app, or API more secure? Well, that's exactly what CloudFlare does. They don't just provide DDoS protection, although that's what they're famous for. Instead, their web application firewall is powered by a massive IP reputation feature that updates for all users. In other words, you attack one of their users, and all of the others are protected just as well. CloudFlare's 24/7 security team is constantly watching for new vulnerabilities and deploying real-time protection. Now, you can also avoid cloud provider lock-in. Anyone who's tried to do a hybrid deployment knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you go with AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever it might be, you can get locked in. Your services have to stay with them if you don't want to have to revamp everything. Not so with CloudFlare. Because CloudFlare gives your business the option to use more than one cloud provider. That means you never get locked in to any of them. They also provide flat pricing for everyone. If you're hit with a DDoS attack, or if your site suddenly becomes incredibly popular and experiences a surge in legitimate traffic, you pay the same amount. Their plans range from free to $20 a month to $100 a month, and custom plans for the enterprise. Right now, CloudFlare is offering Twit listeners a free online chat session with one of their top support engineers to answer any of your questions. Just visit cloudflare.com/twit to sign up today. That's cloudflare.com/twit. And we thank CloudFlare for their support of Security Now. Okay, Steve, so what is this about malware on social media sites? It sounds like it's using some sort of parsing to be able to take little bits and pieces of everything and assemble it into something bad?
Actually, very well done. I did want to take a moment to mention our picture of the week.
Oh, yes, please.
Somebody sent this, and I just got a kick out of it. I don't know if they put this picture together, if they found it somewhere. Anyway, but of course, it follows from our discussion last week of Windows for Warships, which is unfortunately installed on the UK's Trident-class nuclear-armed submarines. Anyway, this is a synthesized picture of the Windows XP, famous, rolling green hills.
Is this called? I think this is called Bliss. Is this Bliss or Azure?
I think that's the Bliss theme.
Yeah,
I think you're right,
thing,
because it's the one I'm familiar with. Anyway, somebody, as they say, photoshopped a very nicely a submarine into the rolling green hills with the. Anyway, just did a beautiful job. So I don't know if the person who sent it to me did this, or if they found it somewhere, but it just a perfect picture for our picture of the week.
XP for nukes? What could possibly go wrong with that?
Oh Lord. I did see. I was just wondering whether it was official wallpaper or what, and I did run across a follow-up article from 2 years ago. Carried by the register.co.uk saying Windows for warships ? Not on our new aircraft carrier. Oh, yes. Apparently, saner heads prevailed. Okay, so to your question about social media, the technology in this is one of the things that caused me to just say, okay, we're losing this battle. A malware was found which was scanning shoot, I can't remember the site that it was scanning, Snapchat, and was looking at comments to a Britney Spears Snapchat posting. The malware would scan through the comments, running a custom hash over each comment. If the hash value matched 183, and that's so this is not a cryptographic hash, because as we know, a cryptographic hash would make it computationally infeasible to deliberately synthesize a comment that had a known hash output. So this was a non-cryptographically strong hash, but the point was it was good enough that the bad guys could make a given comment hash to a value that they wanted. So it would successively step through these comments. If the hash matched 183, it would then run a regular expression, a regex, on the comment to obtain the path of a bit.ly URL. And the regex would essentially look for a number of short strings or characters and then extract the character following the one that matched the regex. And it would do it repeatedly through that string. So the idea was the comment would contain a series of characters embedded, which an unseen pattern match would cause to be successively extracted to create a bit.ly link. So, for example, in this example, and then this actually occurred, someone named A. Smith 2155 posted a comment, #2 hot, make loved to her, comma, ups, #hot, #x. Well, that it turns out that unseen, because the \200D is a Unicode character, which is called the zero-width joiner, normally used to separate emojis. So it's a non-printing, non-visible joiner, which does pass through any filtering, because you want to allow the emoji joiner to allow emojis to get posted. So the bad guys know all of this. So they put this \U200D in successively in front of the printable ASCII that they want this regex to select out of the comment in order to synthesize a bit.ly link, which then the malware fetches, which redirects it to the command and control server, which in this case resolved to static.travelclothes.org and then a slash and a URL to a PHP page, which was also used in the past as a watering hole command and control server by the group that was known to have produced this malware. So standing back a little bit from this, the moral of the story is, as with other forms of steganography, which I would argue this is a form of, that is, as we know, steganography is the practice of putting something in public view, which is obscured in some way that you can look at it and not see what's there. So I would argue this is a form of that. So as with other forms, it is not feasible to attempt to examine public media for its hidden meaning. The only way to find this is to discover the endpoints that access that hidden content and then look at where they are looking in order to find this. So this is just diabolical.
It's ingenious. It's a little bit ingenious.
Oh my goodness.
I gotta have respect for that.
Yes, and that's the point. It demonstrates that, I don't want to say we should give up, but it's like, okay, we're not going to win this. I mean, this is this is clever leveraging of very powerful technology, which was put in place for a good purpose, but is being abused. And there's more of it being produced every day than the bad guy, than the good guys, the white hat security researchers are able to keep up with.
Right.
So
now, where would I use this? Would this mostly be sort of a command and control node? Would this be a way for me to tell the malware what I want it to do? Or
right. So the idea would be you have malware deployed all over the internet, and you want to be able to securely and anonymously send it instructions in a way that, but you don't want to embed the command and control in the malware itself.
Because that's how we've taken them down in the past. If you've got a malware system and you take down the CNC node, then it all ceases. But in this particular case, the command and control node is the internet. So how would you take everything down?
Exactly. And so the malware is like out there reading social media just like users do, but it's doing it with foreknowledge of the way that postings will be laced into the social media to communicate to it. And so it's running a hash function over the postings, looking for those postings that hash to 183. And if found, it then runs a regex over it to extract. Very much the same way the spy novels have. Go to page 13 and go down 5 lines and over 3 words and take the first character of that word. Then go here, anyway, and you assemble a message. This is doing that, and there's just no way to catch it except to. I mean, there is. It is steganography in practice. No longer just in theory. And sure, it certainly it could be that photos could be posted where the least significant bits of one color or the intensity vector in the photo containing the information, but this was actually found in the wild. It is being done.
The diabolical part of that is, look at the ways that we would use to break up a botnet. Command and control, okay, so that won't work. Also, you could look for trigger phrases, and if you find any of those trigger phrases, you can filter out the trigger phrases. That won't work because you can make multiple phrases that will hash out to 183. This, again, I understand it's being used for nefarious things, but this is kind of brilliant.
And we can't take Instagram down. I mean,
well, we could, but we don't want to.
And that's the other thing that's diabolical, is that by putting this in a super popular public stream, we lose the ability to take the malware offline by preventing all instances from going to a single point. All instances are now indirecting themselves through something that cannot be taken down.
Well, I think what we've learned here is that if you want to be secure, it's actually quite simple. All you need to do is don't look for anything concerning Britney Spears.
That's right.
That's it. That fixes it.
So
okay.
there was an NSA report that got leaked, which detailed the way the Russian attackers had attempted to attack the 2016 U.S. elections. And the most interesting takeaway for me, I mean, first of all, it was basically website spoofing. But the question was what to do in the event of two-factor authentication, because this is what two-factor authentication is supposed to prevent. Well, it turns out, and unfortunately in the slide that I've got in the show notes, I did capture it, but in order to fit it onto the page, the original image that I had was already blurry, and I had to squeeze it down to 700 pixels to get it on. But down in the lower right, under point 7, it says if 2FA enabled, also enter, and it says iPhone number and something verification code. And then in the box to the right of that, in fact, I did pull what it says. So the slide says, quote, if the victim had previously enabled two-factor authentication, parens 2FA, the actor-controlled website would further prompt the victim to provide their phone number and their legitimate Google verification code that was just sent to their phone. So, okay, so here's the problem, is that the big problem that nothing has yet solved, and I will say with a single important caveat, a single exception, is man-in-the-middle spoofing. What the Russian attackers had done was to create a fake Google site. And so when users went to their site believing they were at Google, they were asked to log in. So the user would enter their username and password, as many of us have at legitimate Google properties. And then, but okay, because we're at the attacker site, the attacker gets those and has automation that immediately goes to the real Google site and is prompted for the username and password. So they forward that, the attacker's automation forwards the username and password to Google and submits them. Google immediately challenges the attacker automation, saying, oh, please enter the 6-digit PIN we've just sent you. Of course, that PIN goes to the actual user. So the attacker sends back to the user who thinks they're at Google, but they're actually at Snoogle or who knows what else, sends them back exactly that, saying, please enter the PIN that we've just sent you. So the user checks their phone. It's like, oh, yep, I got the PIN, just as they would expect. So they enter that 6-digit code into the fraudulent site that in turn gives it to Google. Now the attacker is logged in as the user, just having freshly authenticated themselves in the presence of two-factor authentication.
I mean, okay, I know that this can be done. I understand the conceptual steps, but again, that's smart because it does take a bit of timing. You have to be able to know how to do this properly, in order to make this work. And I'm assuming they're only doing this for particularly targeted accounts. They want to take over certain accounts because those accounts will give them access to other accounts, right? Because, I mean, this is way too much work just for every possible account on your list.
Well, actually, this can all be automated.
Oh, my goodness.
So the attacker's server immediately forwards username and password. It then looks at the page it receives and then presents that to the user as the next page. So the point is, it is always possible to insert a man in the middle and spoof the user who's not paying attention.
Right.
Now,
but I mean, man-in-the-middle attacks were supposed to stop the. I mean, two-factor authentication was supposed to stop man-in-the-middle attacks because you use a separate route.
Correct. And doesn't, because the point is you are and notice that even the time-based time-based token would not be a solution, because in that case Google would say, please use your Google Auth or Authy or whatever you're using in order to give us the it's only going to be current for 30 seconds, as we know, right. But that's enough. You enter it in, they immediately receive it, forward it to Google before that 6-digit code is expired, and they're logged in. And I should now this was in this case part of an elaborate spear phishing campaign, and it was targeted at employees of one voting machine software company and then a bunch of people in the DNC. So in this case, it was targeted, but this scales with automation all the way up, so that two-factor authentication, unfortunately, really doesn't protect us. And this is why, as I had mentioned before, almost 2 years ago, I brought my forward progress on Squirrel to a halt because I hadn't solved this problem. And it's also why it wasn't yet last week, Padre, but about a month ago, I had said to Leo that I had stopped because somebody in the Squirrel news group where I've been doing all of this work, said, with the advent of OAuth, where users are used to logging in with another site's credentials, if Squirrels presented a dialogue, said, you are logging into Amazon when you're at Evil Site, then the idea was that we were presenting that as a caution to keep users from deliberately giving Evil Site Amazon credential. But in the wake of this growing popularity of OAuth, which is training people to essentially, log in with another site's credentials, I realized that the prevention that we had was requiring too much from users. So what I have just emerged from since we last did the podcast was about a month ago, I said, oh, shoot. Not exactly that word, but you get the idea. We have to fix this. What happened a year and a half ago was I realized that I stopped everything because I felt like I didn't understand the problem well enough. I didn't completely have a grasp of it. So I spent several days with a engineering pad and pencil drawing pictures and to really understand what causes this problem, what causes the man in the middle, essentially the man in the middle problem, and what can be done to solve it. And the root of the problem is that an attacker is able to insert themselves between the authentication and the server to which they are authenticating. That's the crux of the problem. And so what Squirrel incorporated as a result of that work about 18 months ago was something we called CPS, Client Provided Session. Because what normally happens is when you authenticate with a remote site, it gives you your browser a cookie, which is now the token that represents you as the authenticated user, so that your queries, which then bear that token going back to the web server, keep you logged in, keep you authenticated. So the problem with a man in the middle, if they're able to present themselves to that site, then they receive, it's their web session that gets the authentication cookie. And they are then logged in as you at that site. So I thought, okay, that's it. That we have to have some way to cut that man out. And it turns out we have a solution. Until last month, it's not going to be mandatory. It was not, because some things about Windows 10 scared us off back a year and a half ago when Windows 10 was still looming. It turns out that Microsoft was unable to do something that they intended to, which was to cut off the Edge browser from servers running in the local host, that is in its own machine. They had said that they were going to do that, but it turns out there are too many instances where that's being done. So this is the key, is that with Squirrel now, and this is now in the spec, has to be supported, and the failure of it sets off alarm bells, because those bells should never go off, is that when Squirrel uses your Squirrel identity to authenticate with a remote server, that remote server no longer authenticates the web session, because that's the danger here. Instead, the server sends back to the Squirrel client an authenticated token. And so the secret is the Squirrel client then gives that to the user's browser.
Ah, okay.
In other words, it cuts out the man in the middle. And so what happens is when you are authenticating with Squirrel, your browser initiates a page jump to the local host, to the Squirrel port on the local host, and it sits there waiting to load a page. When you're finished authenticating, the Squirrel client gives a redirect, a 301 found redirect, or is it a 302? I don't remember. Anyway, an HTTP redirect back to the browser, and that redirect contains the authentication token. So no bad guy ever gets it. And so we have, as far as I know, the absolutely spoof-proof authentication system that exists.
Right, because the bad guy's counting on you, the human, doing something silly, which is putting in the token into a site that you cannot trust. If Squirrel's taking that away from me, so I am no longer involved in entering that token, you can't spoof Squirrel. You can spoof the human, you can't spoof Squirrel.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, no, that absolutely makes sense. And that's, I mean, it just kind of makes me a little sad, Steve, because I thought multi-factor authentication was a pretty good bet, because that's something that I can actually explain to my parents and my non-tech savvy family. And now I have to explain, okay, yes, this is better than just having a username and password, but make sure you're actually entering in that authentication code only to an actual site, which they may or may not be able to tell. We could argue that multi-factor authentication can improve some classes of attack. That is, if the username and password list or database gets loose, then maybe it helps you, because or if the username and password is captured, statically captured. The problem is that we are still victims of dynamic attack, where on the fly that second factor is provided, and
If it's captured by a man in the middle, it's not protection. And the other problem is that if the username and password database includes the secret key for the one-time password, then you're still in trouble, because they're able to, if they have that secret key, they also know what the proper 6-digit code is.
Right. Now, it's obvious the way that Squirrel can solve this. I mean, this is what's baked in. Could you fix the current two-factor, multi-factor authentication system? Let's use Google's two-factor. And you're using Google to authenticate other services. If somehow the authenticator sent both the service in the cloud and you a code, so in that sense, even if you put the code in and it's intercepted by a third party, the one that's sent directly to the authorized service would not get to them, and therefore they wouldn't be able to access. I mean, is that kind of close to what Squirrel could do, or there's just no way to fix the current system? So
the secret here is that Squirrel's authentication is driven by the domain name, and that means it cannot be spoofed. That is, if an attacker uses a spoof domain name for Squirrel, it just generates a nonsense identity, because unless the domain name is authentic, it won't go to the right place. And so an attacker has to give Squirrel, even if they create a fake page, the Squirrel code has to be to the real website, because that's the URL that Squirrel uses. So Squirrel has the actual web server's URL, gets the authentication token from it, and gives it to the user's browser, thus cutting any man in the middle out. So the only way I could see another system could work is if you had something like this, if you had an unspoofable authentication. The problem is that means the authentication has to be tied to the actual domain name, and Squirrel's the only system that does that.
Right. And unfortunately, since the current authentication schemes typically rely on certificates, not domain names, and we know that certificates can be spoofed or just handed out incorrectly, yeah, you can't really fix that.
Yep.
Well, good. Thank you. I mean, that gives me my optimism for the week, Steve. I really appreciate that.
So we have a little bit, yes. Unfortunately, Tavis Ormandy has been busy as usual. But as we mentioned last week, we suffered his showers while he was thinking about LastPass. The good news is he's moved on. He's done a really interesting project, which he posted on GitHub. I think he only has like 6 projects, and I looked at them, and this is arguably the most interesting, I think, of those. He likes Linux, and he has mature and fast and powerful fuzzing tools on Linux. But he wanted to pound on, that is to fuzz, and as we know, fuzzing is the process of giving software unexpected input, looking for crash events, and if one occurs, then to look at exactly what the execution path was as the software handled what malformed thing you gave it, in order to see if you can leverage that into an exploit. So I mean, it's a powerful technique. The problem is that Windows, I guess, either Windows doesn't have very mature tools, or Tavis just doesn't like them, or he likes Linux more. So what he did was he said, okay, I need a way of testing Windows DLLs under Linux. So he wrote, and it's available publicly on GitHub, something he calls Load Library, which is actually an API in Windows that I use often. It is a tool, a Linux tool, that allows Windows DLLs to be loaded into Linux for examination and use. He says it's not a wine replacement, But it, Wine, of course, being the entire and amazing, frankly, because Squirrel runs under Wine and allows it to run on for Linux and Mac, for example, an amazing Windows replacement. It's not that. It just allows a DLL to be loaded. On the other hand, there are many useful Windows DLLs that have not been ported to Linux, and this allows you to use them, depending upon what dependencies they may have, because you need to provide all of the other DLLs that DLL may load. Anyway, so he created load library, and then he began poking at the MP engine DLL, which is the malware protection engine, which is the core of all of Microsoft's anti-malware code, like Windows Defender and all of them, the malware protection engine throughout their system, their services. And throughout May, he was finding problems. He found that the MSMP ENG type confusion, that was the one that forced Microsoft to issue the emergency out-of-cycle patch, because it was a remotely exploitable, wormable exploit. He then found a UIF decoder DOS problem and a privilege escalation throughout May. Now he has found in fact, he tweeted on June 7th, he said, more critical remote MP engine vulns found on Linux, then reproduced on Windows. Full report on the way. This needs to be sandboxed. So I'm sure he's communicated with Microsoft. I took a little screenshot of the top of the terminal window that he posted along with his tweet, showing that he had given this, he had used load library to load a test case.exe, which it was then scanning, and he hit an invalid pointer in the call to the memory allocation free function, which then I'm sure he pursued, and he figured out that yes, he was able to deliberately cause an invalid pointer. And as we know, that's often the start of being able to leverage that into apparently a remote and networkable exploit. So anyway, a number of things. That means I don't know. Today's Patch Tuesday, by the way, right. And Microsoft did do their standard monthly roll-up. There were security updates to the kernel, to Microsoft Windows PDF, to the kernel mode drivers, to Uniscribe, Device Guard, IE, and also Edge, and the Windows shell. So a bunch of things. I don't know, and I just didn't have a chance because this just happened, whether they also fixed this. Let's hope they did. And I should also mention that Adobe, for those of us still using Flash and other Shockwave and so forth, Lord help us.
I have Flash in a virtual machine because I will not run it on my computer
21
anymore.
Critical vulnerabilities.
Is that all?
A little more than double what they did last month. So a ton of problems fixed in the June Adobe patch. Yeah. The good news is Flash is, it's legacy, but quickly going away, because HTML5 now is offering so many features that people used to need to use Flash for. And I keep, from time to time, I'll go over to twit.tv and unable to look at any of the videos there. Right. Because they still use Flash.
Well, you can do Twitch. You can if you go live at twit.tv and go to Twitch, that will work. YouTube will work. Good. But yeah, I'm the same way. When I'm crawling the web, anytime I find a site where a critical function will not work because I have Flash not just disabled but removed from my system, it always kind of makes me pause and go, okay, well, this is something that we need to work on. This could be made better.
Yep.
But Steve, let me ask you, what is it about the malware protection engine that seems to make it such a big target? Is it poorly written, or is it just that it has to have hooks into everything and that makes it a juicy target?
It's the I word.
Oh.
It's an interpreter.
Oh, that's right.
And anytime you have an interpreter, that's one of the things we're now seeing over and over and over. This thing inherently has to examine what's coming across the network and try to find, understand it. It's got to, if it's an image, it's got to parse the image. If it's an exe, it's got to parse the exe. It's got to look inside it. It has to decompress it. If it's packed, it's doing a huge amount of work. And so again, I'm not laughing at Microsoft. I recognize this is a hard problem to solve. Unfortunately, it's a hard problem to solve. And they haven't, and it's very difficult to solve it perfectly, yet they have to be perfect. And so the big problem is this is, in terms of attack surface, it is on the receiving end of the network connection and has to examine everything that comes in. It has to also be inside of the TLS decryption, because it needs to have the TLS tunnel removed so it's able to get at the exe or the image or whatever it is that's inside there. So it is a ripe attack surface, and Tavis just found another bug in the interpretation of this content.
So what the malware protection engine needs is another protection engine that looks at anything it's parsing and interprets that to see if the first engine should be interpreting it.
And Tavis's comment was this should be sandboxed, which is interesting. The probably for speed, and so as not to cause a big problem, it's in the kernel, which means it's a kernel exploit ripe attack, which is doubly problematical. And you wonder how you sandbox something that needs to be part of the OS, which is essentially where this thing runs.
About
I need to
12 years ago.
Take a break and
go ahead. I was just about to say that I used to have a hardware engine. It was a USB key that you could plug into the side of your computer. This was more than a decade ago. This is when I was still living in San Jose. And it basically intercepted, it was a man in the middle. It would intercept all network traffic. And it used its own mini operating system to scan all traffic and look for any threats. They've gone out of business, but it was an interesting product in that it offered protection that didn't actually touch your operating system.
This is the promise of all of those secure routers that we're beginning to see.
Right.
I just saw that Norton, Symantec is offering something. I don't remember what they called it. It's a very pretty looking geodesic blob on their page introducing it. But I just shake my head, because either it is going to be blind to all TLS traffic passing past it, or it's going to be proxying your TLS and giving all of your machines inside the LAN a certificate that they're going to be forced to trust in order for it to intercept your TLS. And you don't want that either. So, I keep seeing all these claims about a security enhancing router. It's like, unfortunately, a decade ago, yes, you could do that. Today, no.
Not so much.
It's good. You want it to be blind to the traffic, because if it's not, then it's a huge security vulnerability.
Right. In fact, there was a technology that I saw about 3 years ago from one of the major chipset manufacturers who makes routers. And they wanted to create a product for ISPs. It needed to be tied together to an ISP because it would allow all the router endpoints to collectively look for vulnerabilities and exploits, and then everything would be blocked upstream. So it would never even make it to the router. They could just never get the ISPs to buy in. It would add something like $5 to the cost of a router, and that's just too much.
Well, and for example, I fought a problem with Squirrel because I cannot run a TLS server as localhost in the user's machine, much as I would like to, because it'd be nice to be able to have the browser make an HTTPS query. But there's no way to protect the private key from theft if you have a server which is accessible. The only way websites are able to offer secure TLS is that those sites are remote and protected so that no one can get the private key. So I came up with a way of minimizing the impact of making an HTTP query from an HTTPS page, which is technically a mixed content, but this, and it's one of the things I've been doing in the last month, because I decided we have to be able to allow Squirrel to be completely spoof proof. That's just, it's too big a benefit to Squirrel not to be able to enforce that, and now we can. So but you know, there are lots of hurdles to be overcome. There are reasons this hasn't been done before.
Well, Steve, I'm tired of talking about security engines. Maybe when we come back, could we talk a little bit about Bitcoin? I'd love to hear something about cryptocurrency. Maybe, can you come up with something?
News.
Maybe
more bad news, but yes, we will do that.
We're going to get you back to that bad news in just a second, but first, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank another sponsor of Security Now. And folks, this is a sponsor you're going to want if you're looking for a better way to have a mortgage. Of course, it's Rocket Mortgage. Now, this episode of Security Now is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. The mortgage experience really wasn't keeping up with the times. I mean, we're all digital now. All of our paperwork isn't paperwork. It's bits, it's ones and zeros in the cloud. And unfortunately, the financial services haven't really kept up with us on the digital front. Mortgages were dated, and they needed a client-focused technological revolution. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. A Rocket Mortgage gives you the confidence that you need when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. It's simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. This is not some cookie-cutter template. They actually look at your financials. They look at what you're doing and what you're taking in, and they let you know exactly which mortgage fits your sweet spot. Now, it's convenient. Their trusted partners allow you to share your financial information with Rocket Mortgage at the touch of a button. No more dragging in boxes of paperwork, old receipts, and pay stubs. It's also powerful. Whether you're looking to buy your first home or your 10th, Rocket Mortgage is able to perform thousands of calculations in seconds, giving you all the possible options, all the possible predictions. Now, based on your income, your assets, and your credit, Rocket Mortgage can analyze all of your home loan options for which you qualify and find the one that fits you. It's Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. Now, to get started, just go to rocketmortgage.com/securitynow. That's rocketmortgage.com/securitynow. Equal housing lender license in all 50 states. NMLS consumeraccess.org number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support of Security Now. So, Steve, I'm looking for, I don't know, a couple of Bitcoins floating around the internet. What could I possibly do?
So, boy, this was an expensive lesson for someone.
This is better than ordering a pizza with 1,000 Bitcoins.
Yeah, the report was, quote, I copy-pasted a Bitcoin address into Electrum and confirmed the Bitcoin transaction. A few minutes later, I checked with the recipient to verify it had appeared in his wallet. Now, we should 13 Bitcoins. 13 Bitcoins is not chump change any longer. 13 Bitcoins at this morning's value, when I looked it up and did the multiplication, is $35,555. So he sends $35,555 to somebody else and confirms that it had appeared in his wallet. It hadn't. Somehow it was sent to the wrong address. So this guy gets online, explains in some forums of knowledgeable people what happened. He says I checked all browser windows, private messages, chat histories, and do not know the address that grabbed the 13 Bitcoins. Well, when he shared this history of what happened with knowledgeable users on Reddit, they pointed out that the address was almost certainly changed on the fly by malware. Specifically, there exists a clipboard contents altering malware that has been around and known for a couple of years. This malware surreptitiously, continuously monitors the system clipboard for the appearance of a destination Bitcoin address, and when found, immediately and silently replaces it with its own.
Oh, that's mean.
Oh,
that's just insane. So wait, quick question. If he had been paying attention, would he have noticed when he copied and pasted into the window for actually sending the Bitcoin that the address was different? If he had actually looked, I mean, that's a tough sell because it is a convoluted string. But
none of us try to parse that. It just looks like gibberish. It's like, okay, whatever. I don't, you just sort of take it as like this noise, and so yes, you copy it and then go somewhere else, select the field, paste it, and that paste was a different thing than what he copied. And then he sent $35,555, and who among us wouldn't do the same thing unless we were being really careful?
Yeah.
And as we know, it's gone. You don't get that back. There is no way to it's recall. Gone. No. It's wow.
That is just a dagger to the heart. And here's the thing. I mean, the blockchain technology itself is sound. So what they're doing is they're attacking the weakest points, and the weakest points are it's always going to be the client computer. Yep. This I would call this an advanced persistent threat, because this is something that just sits on your computer. It does absolutely nothing because it does not want to warn you about its presence.
Does not want to come to your attention.
Yeah, and it just looks at everything that you're possibly putting into the copy and paste protocol, and it looks for a Bitcoin address, then it replaces. That's kind of brilliant.
Think about a tiny bit of code. So this little bit of code could be added to any freeware that the attacker wanted. Imagine creating or modifying useful existing freeware just to add a tiny little bit of code to, because I mean, all of the hooks to monitor the global clipboard are readily available. So all it does is it just pulls the clipboard looking for the appearance of something that is a Bitcoin address and replaces it with its own. I mean, it's tiny, yet somebody behind that just made themselves more than $35,000.
That's just maddening.
It's paying off way more today than it was a few years ago when it first occurred. And the problem is the fact that it makes so much money means that there's huge financial incentive to do this more.
Right. I actually have like 5 Bitcoins somewhere. I probably should go find them.
Nice. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows that I have 50.
Oh, geez.
When I first was we did a podcast on the blockchain where I went through and explained the brilliant technology that was the base of Bitcoin. And back then I set up on a machine, the one that I use for Skype. It was I think it was an i5 or it was not a big fancy, it was not a GPU mine or anything, because back then Bitcoins were easy, and one hash completion was 50 Bitcoins. Whoa. That's how long ago it was. And I woke up the next morning and I had 50 Bitcoins. It's like, and I told everybody the next week, I said, hey, guess what? This little thing I ran overnight, it made 50 Bitcoins. Now, they weren't worth much back then.
No.
They are today.
No. I had this was before I was at Twit. I had a system that I was reviewing for Dell, and it was this multi-Xeon monster. And so I'm like, okay, I'll try Bitcoin. And so I started mining, and I had left it running for maybe 6 or 7 hours. And it had found 5 Bitcoins. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's not that hard. This is before I really understood the blockchain technology. And when I tried to do it a year later, I had an even more powerful system, and it just sat there spinning, and spinning.
And in fact, there was a topic of discussion in the last week about how there's some malware which is commandeering Raspberry Pis for coin mining, and I'm thinking, who cares?
Yeah, you could get a million of
Raspberry
those
Pi?
together. It won't matter. Unless you're trying to mine a brand new cryptocurrency, no, Raspberry Pi just not going to cut it. In fact, even the dedicated ASIC machines aren't really doing it anymore.
Correct. You would have to be mining a brand new cryptocurrency and being the only person mining the brand new cryptocurrency in order for a Raspberry Pi to have a snowflake's chance in order to, of actually generating anything. It's just like, no.
Yeah.
In fact, a friend of mine, Mark Thompson, who is a Bitcoin miner, said that two of the main GPU makers, and I don't remember which two he said, but they're the big guys,
AMD
are now doing
NVIDIA.
a dedicated coin mining chip. So it's not just repurposing GPUs. They're going to be doing mining silicon.
Well, I remember when NVIDIA first started offering the GPU clusters. So just like you could rent AWS, you could rent a cluster for a certain amount of time. And it was 2 weeks after they made the announcement that the amount of processing power you needed to get a Bitcoin became more expensive than the cost of the Bitcoin. And it's phenomenal how fast that will rise.
Well, and at some point you have to wonder why anybody would sell you GPUs to mine Bitcoins when they could just plug them in themselves and mine them. Actually, it turns out that in Arizona, where Mark is, it's only feasible to mine there because the power is so inexpensive compared to, for example, where I am in California. You can't make money in California mining Bitcoins because the energy requirement to run the GPU is higher than at the current difficulty of getting a coin is you end up losing money no matter how hard you mine, no matter how fast and seriously you mine.
But you got to remember Butterfly Labs. So Butterfly Labs was the company that was making the custom ASIC machines, and they did exactly what you said. They would make the machines for the customers after taking their money and then hold on to them for a few weeks or months, mine with them, and then ship them out. So they probably have a bunch of Bitcoin too.
So F-Secure is a great security firm that we talk about often. The bad news is they took a careful look at a very popular OEM, FOSCAM, F-O-S-C-A-M, and I got a kick out of the FOSCAM site. It's www.foscam.com. They are currently offering a Happy Father's Day giveaway. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. Give your old man something serious to worry about. Oh, my goodness. 18 different serious vulnerabilities in FOSCAM's IP internet-connected cameras. And unfortunately, it's not just the FOSCAM brand. CHACON, Thompson, 7 Links, Opticam, Netis, Turbo, Novo DO, Ambient Cam, NEXXT, Technax, QCam, iView, eBode, and SAB are all OEMs of FOSCAM and use the same technology. So this is widespread. The researchers at F-Secure documented 18 vulnerabilities that the manufacturer has not fixed despite being alerted to those problems several months ago. So F-Secure responsibly disclosed their findings, told FOSCAM, hey, here's 18 problems, and you're not going to believe what some of them are. All of the flaws were confirmed in a camera marked under the Opticam i5 HD brand. So there's yet another one. And then a smaller number of those 18 were also found in the FOSCAM C2. The F-Secure's report noted that the weaknesses are likely to exist in, as I've said, many other camera models FOSS-CAM manufacturers and sells under other brand names or OEMs to other people. They wrote, the sheer number of vulnerabilities offers an attacker multiple alternatives. It's not just, here's the one way in, it's pick your way in.
It's a menu of exploits.
In compromising the device, they wrote, among the discovered vulnerabilities are insecure default credentials, including a null password, and hard-coded credentials, both of which make it trivial for an attacker to gain unauthorized access. Other vulnerabilities allow for remote command injection by an attacker, world-writable files and directories, which allow an attacker to modify the code and gain root privileges, hidden telnet functionality, allowing an attacker to use telnet to discover additional vulnerabilities in the device and within the surrounding network. In addition, the device's, quote, firewall, unquote, doesn't behave as a firewall and also discloses information about the validity of the credentials. Dan Gooden, who we often quote as a writer for Ars Technica, said, the flaws allow for a wide range of hacks, including using the internet-connected cameras to participate with other infected devices in distributed denial of service attacks, accessing private videos, and compromising other devices connected to the same local network. The vulnerabilities are compounded by the ability to permanently replace the normal firmware controlling the camera with malicious firmware that can survive restarts without being detected. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than this.
Right, because I mean, essentially you're giving them the ability to rewrite the operating system of the camera to whatever they
install
want.
Their own.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yay.
Oh. So, so the standard wisdom is you must disable, if at all possible, universal plug and play, because that allows devices inside to statically map ports from the public internet into your internal network. You must have universal plug and play, and in any event, now iOS devices have to be on an isolated network segment. That is, if you want to play with this stuff with light bulbs and cameras and baby monitors and microwaves and refrigerators and everything else, give it its own network segment and or isolate the devices where you have important information, like your iOS and your Linux and your Windows and your Mac devices. Put them on a separate network segment, and where those are unable to see each other, so that your iOS devices can have a field day, but only within themselves, and not be able to reach out and get into your main PCs. It's no longer optional. This is the world we live in today, unfortunately.
You know, we created something like this for Know-How just last week. I can't remember who first proposed it. We created a 3 dumb router setup, and that actually would solve for this really, really well.
Yep, 3 dumb routers is
segment everything.
Yep, you really do need physical network isolation, and 3 dumb routers is a nice way to do it.
And in fact, Cisco 2 or 3 weeks ago at their big IoT conference, they released a new IoT suite, and the core technologies have existed for a while, but they put them together. Essentially what it does, they've got a security engine that looks for devices that might be exhibiting owned behavior. So they're starting to probe the network. They're starting to exfiltrate data. And what it will do is it dynamically segments those into their own VLAN. So it completely isolates them.
Nice.
And then it warns the administrator. And this is the sort of activity that we've been telling people to do for a while on Twiet. It's this whole idea of you've got invaders in the walls, so you need to change your security to be able to deal with exploits already in your network.
I think you raise a really good point, which is we're in this purgatory at the moment between our routers not yet being universally smart enough like this to protect us, and IoT devices now having gotten smart enough to hurt us. And so for while we're here, it's incumbent upon individuals who know enough to be proactive in going out of their ways to enforce this kind of protection. But the point you raise, I think, is a good one, and that is that one can foresee a year, 2, 5, or 10 from now that will have been taken care of. Routers will have separate ports, or Wi-Fi will exist in separate segments, such that you can explicitly give some devices their own place to play, and it won't be up to users to do 3 dumb routers. Instead, you'll just have one smart router.
Right. And we're getting closer to that. In fact, we've got Aspire in the chat room who is saying, well, unfortunately, something like a Chromecast doesn't work when you segment it. It doesn't mine, but mine's a bit more advanced because I've got a switch that supports dynamic VLAN. So the way that it works in my network is everything has its own sandbox. It can only see the internet and itself. It sees no other devices unless a device of a higher authorization, like all my administrative accounts, request Chromecast support. Like I want to send a command to the Chromecast or I want to stream to the Chromecast, then just for the duration of that connection, it puts them in a shared VLAN so that they can share traffic, and the minute it's gone, it destroys the VLAN. That was super enterprisey 10 years ago. The switch I'm using is actually 11 years old. So, and I know that something like my Synology router actually does support VLANs and rules for VLANs. So we're not too far off. I mean, it's difficult to visualize right now, which is why I love your 3 dumb router setup, because they're physical boxes. But we can approximate it if you've got a smart enough engine that's looking at what devices exist on the network.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. That's kind of hope, right? I mean, that's a positive thing.
Oh, I think it is. I absolutely. And unfortunately, it's being driven by necessity, where the necessity is we're in a very vulnerable position at this point. But I'm glad that Cisco's stepping up, and I imagine at some point before long, we'll just be able to purchase those sorts of devices.
Well,
at retail.
It's got to become table stakes. Because I unfortunately, all consumer and even SMB routers are still operating on that flawed perimeter security model. The whole idea that we can build a wall and you keep the bad guys on the outside and the good guys on the inside. You can't do that anymore. You just have to assume that something inside your network has been exploited. And so if your security isn't segmenting and keeping that traffic away from good traffic, then it's not a good solution.
Well, and look at the enterprise situations where the exploited entity was an employee that allowed, clicked on a link, and now, unfortunately, we'll get to this shortly, you don't even need to click. You just need to hover, believe it or not. And because they didn't have segmentation, the executive assistant was able to compromise the core network infrastructure and allow advanced persistent threats to exist in Sony or at RSA for a long period of time and really do damage.
I have a friend who runs a fairly large network in Virginia. And one of the things that he implemented, and at first all the IT people hated it, was he took away the super user account. I said, nobody has this. And they said, well, sometimes we have to jump between network segments. He said, well, you have all the authentication credentials you need. You can do that. And then as sort of a way to give back later on, he did authorize super user account usage, but it would time out every 5 minutes. So you could log in as a super user, do what you had to do. And if you were there longer than 5 minutes, it would time you out again. And if you logged in more than twice consecutively, he got a message saying someone might be abusing the super user account. And it's involved, it's complicated, it ticks people off, but it's policy and following that policy that's really going to help enforce security at in large networks.
And that also sort of points to a broader concept, and that is monitoring. That's the other thing we see. The reason an intrusion detection system is useful is that it's not a firewall. It's an adjunct to a firewall. It is monitoring usage. It is monitoring what's going on. And so, that right thinking admin said, okay, I'm gonna help people do the right thing, but if somebody does this twice in a short period of time, I'm going to get a notification. That's brilliant, because that means that he is watching the way the system is being used, making sure it's not being abused.
Yeah. And unfortunately, he tried to do an automated system, and it kept coming back to, it's like, no, he can't trust any automated system, because any automated system is going to follow a set of rules, and you can game the rules. It's more difficult to game an IT administrator who actually knows what he's doing. Right.
In fact, I had to do something like that because I wrote, as we know, GRC's e-commerce system myself, and I wanted to prevent unexpected abuse. That is to say, I recognized that I could not predict all the things that someone could do. So I said, okay, I don't care what is going on. After some fixed number of queries to the e-commerce system, that person is locked out, period. I'm not going to try to figure it out what they're doing. I'm not going to say, oh, does this look good or bad? If this count hits the limit, they're banned. And that was the one bug I ever had in the system after I brought it online, was that it turns out that I wasn't even discriminating between a successful purchase, and if they screwed up their credit card number, or they didn't get their zip code right, or they couldn't remember what their PIN was, and they brought the count right up to, one short of where they would be banned, and then they succeeded, so that they managed to purchase Spinrite. Then the system wouldn't let them download it.
Oh,
because that final event put them into the banned category, and then when they tried to download it, said, "I'm sorry, you've been blocked due to abuse of the system. Contact GRC."
I can imagine that customer service letter was probably a little annoyed.
And the moment it happened, it's like, oh, that's the one thing I should have allowed. And so, of course, when they successfully purchase, I zero their counter, and then they're good to go again. So, but again, I recognized I could not predict what of the nature of the abuse might be, so I wouldn't care. Right. I would set a high limit, but if they hit, sorry, I don't know what you're doing, but it seems a little strange. So
that's what we got.
So, and I'm sure you're dealing with this over on Twiet, Padre. This yes, Intel Advanced Management Technology, the hidden processor on the motherboard, and the concerns that it raises. Turns out that Microsoft, rather than just being theoretical as it has been until now and a concern, Microsoft found malware, advanced malware, produced by a group they've named the Platinum Group. It's a state-sponsored hacking group, so it is high-end. They are abusing the Serial-over-LAN, which, of course, the abbreviation is SOL, and that's a fitting abbreviation. For the that's a part of the so-called AMT, the Active Management Technology, which in turn is of Intel's ME, the management end, which is the independent processor embedded within the Intel support chipsets for the higher end enterprise, the vPro, and some other high-end motherboards.
Yeah.
And so essentially what this means is that there is a supported by the motherboard, OS agnostic, and even on when the power is off, the LAN interface is still up, and there is an option. The thank goodness, the one saving grace is that serial over LAN is not enabled by default. So, but if it is enabled on the motherboard, there is malware using it, and essentially what happens is it's a serial emulation over LAN. So if something bad has network access to the interface on the motherboard, would be, for example, a server, then they're able to pretend to be a serial interface which has been exploited by this platinum written malware over a TCP connection in order to access the motherboard. So the good news is that Microsoft is not saying whether they have determined that other malware is able to turn this on, or whether it has to be done administratively, by the enterprise setting up the system in the beginning. The problem, the fact that it is unfortunately a BIOS setting and not a physical jumper that needs to be physically changed, that's the one caveat. And so you wonder if it's not possible for something to turn on and then use the serial over LAN in order to abuse it.
Precisely. I mean, so the way that we've been covering it on Twite is that this is part of the lights out management solution. So an administrator who might have to administer,
if you'll pardon the term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it allows them to get into machines even if they're off. It's a separate processor that's always running. Now, if you are running a vPro processor, you do have to actually turn on AMT. It has to be provisioned for any of this to work. But as you mentioned, that is a soft setting. And since the management engine runs separately, we don't actually know its full capabilities. Intel has been very mum about that for good reason. Yep. But it's sort of this magical thing that we know is always running and has very deep access. It can essentially bypass the operating system and any security precautions that you've put into place in your OS. But when you get access to the serial over LAN, this is essentially a out-of-band management technology. It allows you to use a serial console server to be able to access devices, again, even if their primary interface is misconfigured, broken, or otherwise off. Now, the question, and I was going over a couple of forums talking about this, there are people who are saying that even if you don't turn on the serial over LAN, a SOL feature, if you have provisioned AMT, you can use AMT to turn that on. And you can do that even without turning on the computer, which is absolutely terrifying. Because because then you can use that. You can use the serial over LAN interface to exfiltrate data. And because it looks so different than standard TCP IP traffic, the typical security engines you might have watching your network will have no idea. That's scary beyond belief. Because it means that I now have to change the way my threat engines are looking at my network.
And when I looked at this last time, I remember noting that they are supporting TLS connections too.
Yes.
That they've got certs built into the firmware where it's protected, which allows them to have certs. So that suggests that that you wouldn't be able to inspect that traffic either. It would just look like innocuous encrypted TCP. And so something goes, oh, well, okay, fine.
Chumley wants to know why we're only mentioning Intel chips. It's because this only exists in Intel's vPro chips. This is an Intel-specific issue. Now, one of the other things is Microsoft did respond. So they've updated Windows Defender. It doesn't eliminate the problem, but what it will do is it watches that traffic. And they have something that they've designed that they say can differentiate between legitimate AMT traffic and illegitimate AMT traffic. And it probably has something to do with the actual amount of traffic that you're passing. Because if it's true serial-over-LAN, it should be a very minuscule amount of traffic. So the minute you start seeing it look like a Samba connection, that's probably an exfiltration.
Right.
Oh, my gosh.
Time for our last insert.
Let's do one more insert, then we can take it home. And, folks, you know, there's one thing that I like more than security, and that's eating. You may have noticed that. But when I eat, I try to eat healthy, but it just doesn't work out. I know the best way for me to be healthy is to cook my own food, to know the ingredients that go into my meal, and to take that time. It's a bit of a Zen moment to actually prepare my own food. But I'm really busy. When I'm not here at TWiT, I've got 3 other jobs that I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have time to go to the market. I don't have time to think up new recipes. I don't have time to make sure that all my ingredients are completely fresh. So what if I told you that there was a vendor out there who could do all of that for you? What if there was a vendor who could make sure you get fresh ingredients, who makes sure you get fresh recipes, who could deliver all of this right to your door? Well, stop imagining because, well, it exists. It's called Blue Apron. This episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Fresh, high-quality ingredients make a difference. Blue Apron knows that, and that's why it's important to them to know where your food comes from. Blue Apron sets the highest quality standards for their community of over 150 local farms, fisheries, and ranchers across the United States. For less than $10 per person per meal, Blue Apron will deliver seasonal recipes along with pre-portioned ingredients to make delicious home-cooked meals in 40 minutes or less. And by shipping the exact amount of each ingredient required for a recipe, they are reducing food waste. This means you're not going to have that spice bottle that sits on your rack for the next 4 years. You're not going to have ingredients go bad in the fridge. They only send you what you need for your meal. Their freshness guarantee promises that every ingredient in your delivery arrives ready to cook, or they'll make it right. Their mission is to make incredible home cooking accessible to everyone. They deliver to 99% of the continental United States. There's no weekly commitment, so you only get deliveries when you want them, and you can customize your recipes every week based on your dietary preferences. You get to choose from a variety of new recipes each week, or let Blue Apron's culinary team surprise you. Their upcoming meals include warm smoked trout and asparagus salad with fingerling potatoes and garlic croutons. How about elote-style vegetable tostadas with summer squash, poblano peppers, and cilantro rice, or peach honey glazed chicken with mashed sweet potatoes, collard greens, and Thai basil. It's all available for you at Blue Apron. You can check out this week's menu and get 3 meals free with your first purchase and free shipping by going to blueapron.com/securitynow. That's blueapron.com/securitynow. You'll love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with Blue Apron. Don't wait. Go to blueapron.com/securitynow right now. It's Blue Apron, a better way to cook. And we thank Blue Apron for their support of Security Now. Okay, Steve, so let's get away from processors that run with the power of the Dark Lord and instead talk about this common-held internet myth, which is, well, as long as I don't click on it, I'm fine, right? I mean, that's still true, right?
Yes. This is why I'm losing hope.
You can't lose hope. I get my hope from you.
I'll still be here, but I don't know. We have it's been discovered in the wild, a PowerPoint-based link mouse over based downloader, which leverages Windows PowerShell such that simply hovering over a malicious link is now sufficient to take over your computer. This newly discovered attack does not rely upon macros, JavaScript, or VBA, Visual Basic for applications, for its execution. When the user opens the document and they are presented with text that says loading ... please wait. And that's displayed as a blue hyperlink to the user. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. Now, we're all kind of trained, even those in the know, to hover our mouse over a link to see if we get a little pop-up message about like what that is, or often that's the way our browsers will show us where the link is pointing to. We're able to inspect, visually inspect the URL. Well, it turns out that PowerPoint supports a hover event on links. So when the user mouses over the text, which is, as I said, the way we typically check the destination of a hyperlink, the underlying PowerPoint documentation will execute the hover action for the link, which executes PowerShell. Now, it's the sequence. I mean, that's bad enough, but it's like, okay, well, what can happen? Well, somebody, the hacker who devised this, went through some serious work in order to knit together an exploit. But this is one of the things that just sort of makes me think, okay, all hope is lost. So the PowerShell command that is invoked by hovering over the link connects to the domain cccn.nl, which retrieves and saves a file named c.php to the disk, the user's drive, as ii.jse in the temp folder. That file is then executed by WScript, the Windows scripting engine, and that drops a file named 186.gop. JavaScript then executes the certutil.exe with the -decode parameter, giving it the 186.gop file as the thing to decode. The result is saved in the temp folder as 484.exe. Then 484.exe is executed, spawning mstsc.exe to allow remote desktop access to the system. That fires up the RDP protocol to the system. After that, the 484exe was renamed and saved under App Data Roaming Microsoft IE sectcms.exe by the mstsc.exe, where it gets re-executed from the new location. And finally, a bat file was written to the disk and executed using command exe, which changes the attributes of that sectcms.exe program to hidden read-only and system. It also deletes all of the intermediate files having extensions text.exe, gop.log, and .jse from the temp folder, thus cleaning up after itself and removing the most obvious tracks. And all of that happens just from the historically safe practice of hovering over a link in a document that you have received and opened.
Oh, Steve, does this only work on the web-aware versions of Office with PowerPoint? Because it would seem as if there needs to be some sort of handle for PowerPoint to be running in a browser in order for this to work. Or is this just default on all installations of Office ever?
I believe that this runs if you receive a PowerPoint document in email. So it is it's the viewer, the viewer in email knows how to display a PowerPoint document, and unfortunately PowerPoint is given the power to respond to a hover action. And so that's the chink in the link, if you will, that allows then all of the rest of this cascade of actions to the unwitting user who has been told, do not click any link.
And
but no one's ever had hover take over their computer until now.
Do not hover over a link. Do not move your mouse. Do not turn on the computer.
Or just give up and go home.
Just give up.
Ouch.
Is there a patch for this yet? Is this something that Microsoft's going to patch up, or is this an unpatchable issue?
Not a bug, it's a feature.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is very, very reticent remove features because they have huge numbers of enterprise users that have incorporated those features into their daily usage. So
I will say this. I am currently running Microsoft Office 2007, and my PowerPoint does not have hover management. It's not new enough to know what to do when that happens. So,
and I'm on 2003 naturally because
every time I do Windows Weekly, I get Paul Thurrott and Mary Jo Foley making fun of me. But I'm like, what has changed? I can still do everything I need to do. I don't need to upgrade to 365.
Nope.
And actually, this saves me.
2003, I acquired a license back when the MSDN, because I'm a registered Microsoft developer, and so it used to be you had access to all those things, and so that's a static license that allows me to use it rather than the new dynamic process where they're counting and decrementing every use. So I already got that. That'll be my Win 7 Office suite, and it working.
Now, do you still have your folder? Because I got that action pack folder that had all the software in sleeves. I used to love that thing.
Yeah,
I still have a copy of Windows XP, the enterprise version of Windows XP. I've been thinking about installing that.
I'm still using a copy of Windows XP.
Right. I use it for academic pursuits when I want to get things owned really, really quickly. I did want to mention, if we have any people who really want to dig in deeper, the link in the show notes takes what I just said. What I just gave everybody was a summary, believe it or not. But there is a blow-by-blow, process-by-process, complete breakdown of the exploit of this hover over the link attack. So if somebody wants more. Motherboard had some interesting coverage of the Worldwide Developer Conference last week and of some of the content that Apple was promoting. Motherboard's title was "Apple is trying to make your iMessages even more private." And it seems to me that trying is the operative word and maybe a bit of misdirection. During an interview that the well-known Apple blogger John Gruber, who blogs Daring Fireball, is his site. Craig Federighi, is that how you pronounce his name? I think it is. Yeah, it sounds
right. Craig Federighi said that the company has figured out a way to do cross-iDevice syncing to the cloud while remaining unreadable, or while still remaining unreadable to Microsoft. So the idea being that if you delete something like an iMessage from one device, the new next-gen iCloud sync will delete that from all your devices, which has not been a feature that they've been able to support until now. And Microsoft's touting the fact that they don't have the keys for doing this.
Right, and that's actually what we want. We don't want them to have the keys. We want us to have the keys. And
correct.
The most reassuring question that you can ask of any vendor who's trying to tell you that they're protecting your privacy is, what happens if I lose my keys / my authentication? And they should say, you're out of luck. If they say that, then I can trust them. If they say, well, there's a recovery process, I say, well, then you do have a copy of the keys.
And in fact, you heard me last week saying that that's the way Squirrel was designed. And I'm sort of recognizing that Squirrel may not be for everyone because it has made a different decision about key recovery than everybody else. That is, it is secure, and so there is a small responsibility that we go out of our way to manage in a useful way. But so my point is that I don't have a problem if it's not for everyone. It is but for those for whom it is absolute protection. And and we do all kinds of things that I'll get into as soon as I have this thing published, because then I'll have more people's attention, because it'll be like, wow, what is this? How does this work? But I did make that decision that it's a party authenticator. There's no one to go crying to, but even so, we do give you get out of jail free cards. You just have to put it somewhere.
Right. Now, so let's take this and extrapolate it to the business side of Apple.
Well,
this is a great technology. It's a great movement for security, but at some point, someone's going to say, I paid so much money for my Apple devices, you can't give me a way to get my encrypted iCloud messages back?
So Craig Federighi said, our security and encryption team has been doing work over a number of years now to be able to synchronize information across what we call your circle of devices, he said, all those devices that are associated with a common account, in a way that they each generate and share keys with each other that Apple does not have. And so, even if they store information in the cloud, it is encrypted with keys that Apple doesn't have. So users can put things in the cloud, they can pull stuff down from the cloud, so the cloud still serves as a conduit and even ultimately kind of a backup for them, but only they can read it. Now, the motherboard says it's unclear exactly how Apple is able to pull this off, as there's no explanation of how this works other than from those words from Craig. The company didn't respond to a request for comment asking for clarification. It's possible that we won't know the exact technical details, Motherboard writes, until iOS 11 officially comes out later this year. Meanwhile, cryptographers, to your point, Padre, are already scratching their heads and holding their breath. Ken White, and cryptography researcher, told Motherboard in an online chat, quote, the $6 million question, maybe that's in Bitcoin these days, how do users recover from a forgotten iCloud password? If the answer is they cannot, that's a major user experience trade-off for security. If you can, maybe via email, then it's end-to-end with Apple-managed or derived keys. If recovery from a forgotten iCloud password is possible without access to the keys on a device's secure enclave, it's not truly end-to-end. It's encrypted, but decryptable by parties other than the two people communicating. In that sense, it's closer to the default security model of Telegram than that of Signal. And I say, as I have said to our users, to our listeners on this podcast, irrespective of that, I continue to contend that unless the user is explicitly managing, that is to say, receiving and verifying their communicating co-parties' encryption keys, as, for example, is the case with Threema, Apple remains entirely free to insert an additional party line key into any or all communications. I'm not suggesting they are doing so, but they do have the capability of responding to wiretap warrants. iMessage is many-to-many messaging, not just one-to-one, and users have no visibility into precisely who those many co-parties are. So, for example, I have a buddy that I send messages to. Oh, look, it's magic. No one is ever looking at keys. Nobody's looking at authentication. How does that happen? Apple does that. Apple manages those keys. And we know that iMessage supports group messaging, where you can have a bunch of people, and it's all magic. Well, everybody I'm sending to has their own key. So that means that my client must be individually encrypting those individual messages for each party in the message. Nothing prevents Apple from sticking in an extra key, an NSA key, so that now my outgoing messages are being also encrypted by a key for a key that the NSA holds. Again, I'm not saying they're doing it. I'm just saying this is a classic case of convenience versus security trade-off. Apple, we know, stands for security, but the architecture and the design is not secure. They can say, oh, it's end-to-end encrypted. We can't see. No, if you wanted to.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing. I like the fact that they seem to be security first here, but the details are far too sparse. I need to know exactly what you mean by we don't have your keys. Because they seem to be talking around whether or not they can recover or whether or not they might be able to assist you with getting your data back after a major disaster. That can't be ambiguous. But, Steve, there's another part here. And again, this goes into your security versus convenience. This would be a great feature if I could opt into it. If you could have a user who could make a informed decision to say, if I lose my authentication, this data is gone, versus something that's just rolled out as the default in iOS 11.
Right.
But then again, aside from you and me and a good part of the Security Now audience, I don't see any users volunteering the ability to lose their data. To me, I mean, I have enough trouble convincing the people I live with who are relatively intelligent that they should be concerned about their digital privacy. If I tell someone, well, this is more protection, but if you lose your username and password, everything that you've done before is gone, I don't know a single one of them who would accept that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they have to accept that. If we have a low bar of security for many people, that means there's many people around us who get exploited. And when many people around us get exploited, it increases the risks that we will get exploited. That's just how that works.
I can't wait until you and I have a chance to sit down and I can go over all of the decisions that are part of the final squirrel result and how it meets these goals, because it really does.
It's gonna come down to you talking to your friends and saying, well, have you enabled this? Because if you haven't enabled it, I'm sorry, you can't be part of my circle because I can't trust you anymore.
So one real quick comment. I just noticed something that I just got a kick out of, and that is that Microsoft's TechNet blog, and this got by me. This was in April. They noted that the Azure TLS certificates were changing. They wrote in their blog, "We know security is a top priority for you, and so is uptime of your applications. To give you additional assurance of the authenticity of Azure services, most Azure services get their SSL/TLS certificates from a known set of intermediate certificate authorities, CAs, that Microsoft operates. Microsoft publishes details of these CAs in its certificate practice statement. Some organizations," they write, "configure their applications with specific CAs using a security practice that we've often discussed here on the podcast called certificate pinning." And as we know, pinning a certificate means that you record the actual fingerprint, the cryptographic signature of the certificate, so that it's not just, you're no longer trusting the whole chain, you are saying this specific certificate is what we're going to trust. They write, "Since CAs expire and get replaced, this practice requires that all applications be updated periodically to use the latest CAs. If this is not done in time, the application may get interrupted. To make this process easy for you, Microsoft publishes new CAs well in advance of using them. The current intermediate CAs used by Azure are due to expire in May 2018. So this was 1 year advanced notice. Microsoft published a new set of CAs last year, they wrote, in the July 2016 revision of their CPS, their Certificate Practice Statement. Azure services will begin using these new CAs from July 27th, 2017, so coming up next month. If your organization configures your application with specific CAs, then you must ensure your applications are updated by July 27th, 2017 to prevent interruptions. So next month. Anyway, the point was, I got a kick out of this. They finally said Microsoft Azure services were previously signed by either of 2 intermediate certificates. They are adding 4 additional intermediates, and they have a new endpoint. The original CRL, the Certificate Revocation List distribution point, was public-trust.com. The new CRL distribution point, meaning the parent of their new certificates, may not surprise our listeners to know, is digicert.com, which is my chosen and favorite CA. So bravo to Digicert for a nice get, as they say, being the root signer for Microsoft's Azure services.
And this is what it's going to take for other CAs to stop playing on the gray side. It's going to, you've got the large providers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, getting in there and saying, if you're going to do this, we just won't use you. And let's see how well your business is going to do if we no longer trust your certs.
Right.
So yeah, kudos to Digicert, kudos to Microsoft. This is absolutely warranted, and it's absolutely overdue. This probably should have happened years ago.
And if you play fast and loose, like Symantec was caught doing, by allowing, basically thinking that you're printing money, and let's give other organizations the ability for unmonitored printing in our name. And well, we know what happens is that Symantec is in trouble because they were playing fast and loose, and now Chrome and Firefox are looking hard at minimizing their trust.
Right, and they're still in timeout, right? That time period hasn't expired yet.
Oh yeah, they're in trouble for a few years, and they're going to.
There's a reevaluation that Chrome is going to do at some point in the next, is it 9 months? So essentially, they're in timeout. So they're expiring all their certificates. They're in timeout right now for new certificates.
And they're only allowing short new issues. Yep. They're in the doghouse.
This is the security equivalent of go sit in the corner and face the wall. Wear this hat.
I did find a nice note from a Spinrite user, James Campbell, with the subject "Thank you!" And here's yet another use of Spinrite. He says, I upgraded one of my NASs and decided to use the old one to set up a server at my church. The problem was I had 13 hard disks laying around. I knew that some of them were laying around because I outgrew their capacity. And I knew that some had failed. But alas, Post-it notes don't stick forever. So they became unlabeled drives with unknown background. He said, so Spinrite to the rescue. Today, 13 disks fully tested, 4 with catastrophic failures that wouldn't even mount. And the remaining 9 have now all been fully verified by Spinrite. The old NAS is now stuffed with 4 matching drives and has been installed at the church. Thanks, Steve, Jim C. And Jim, thanks for sharing your success using Spinrite.
I had something very similar to this. I had drive corruption because of it was a brownout. So power failed, then brownout, then power. They don't. Yep. NASs hate that. And so I had a Synology, one of their 12-bay or 16-bay, or a large one.
Nice, yeah.
And when it went down and it came back up, 6 of the drives were reporting smart. They said they weren't going to spin up. pulled all the drives, kept them labeled, ran Spinrite on all of them, put it back in, and when it came up, it said 2 failed drives. And I was able to get everything synced up before replacing the questionable drives one by one. And again, that was on me because I should have, it's remote location. I should have had it set up so that it was notifying me when it was starting, the smart counters were getting up there. But yeah, it works. I will say, I tried doing the same thing with a Ready NAS, which is the Netgear NAS. That did not like it. It's very, very picky. Synology, fine. Ready NAS, not so much.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the problems we're seeing that RAID in general is trying to get smart and is beginning to have inner problems with drives. For example, there are some RAID now that look at the timing of the drive, and if the drive seems to be taking too long, they decide, oh, there's a problem here, and go off. Whereas some drives do take some time, but then come back with an answer, and the RAID has already given up on them.
Right.
So it's sort of, there isn't a standard for this, and people are making things up as they go along and causing themselves problems.
That's why there's only 2 types of drives I use in my NASs right now. One is Western Digital Red, because that's got the TLER control, so you can essentially say, don't figure it out. The NAS does everything. Just let the NAS do it. Time-limited error recovery. Right. And the second one is a Seagate's Iron Wolf series, which is awesome because I've got a bunch of 8 terabyte drives. They also run cool. I think they will do TLER reconfiguration as well. But yeah, I've had so many drives from different manufacturers, including Seagate and Hitachi, that I've put into NASs, and they don't do well.
We've talked on the podcast about Orphan Black.
Yes.
One of Leo's favorites. Tatiana Masley does this incredible job.
So many different parts.
multiple characters. I just did want to note to our listeners, since we've talked about it through the years, that the 5th and final season has just started back up again. And also that another of ours was Sensate. And that the 2nd season appeared a couple of weeks ago on Netflix. So if anyone had missed that occurring and liked the 1st season of Sensate, the 2nd season is there. And last week I meant to mention that the previous day, that is Wednesday, which was Worldwide Developer Conference Day last week, the sequel to Monument Valley was released. It was a favorite of ours 3 years ago. And in fact, it was the 2014 iPad Game of the Year. Not free. It's $5 for iOS and also an Android release coming soon, published by Us2 Games. For what it's worth, I grabbed it, and I don't know if it was worth $5. I went through the entire thing in 2 sittings.
Steve, tell me what you really think.
I mean, it's beautiful, but it's sort of more of the same. So I was like, okay. I mean, it was interesting and nice, but again, I would like something that lasted a little more than 2 sittings. But so there it is.
I think Monument Valley is coming to the Nintendo Switch.
Nice. Makes sense.
Yeah, right.
They have a much bigger staff. They used to have 8 people, and what happened was it was such a grind that they did a little bit of a release. They released something called what was it called? It was an update to Forgotten Shores. So they did an enhancement to the original Monument Valley, the Forgotten Shores extension, but they then wanted to go off and do something else. They're now 20 people strong, and every single one of those additional 12 people came to Us2 Games because they had fallen in love with Monument Valley and wanted to do more. So that's why they ended up saying, okay, fine, we'll do more.
Well, that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
And 30 million downloads of the first version. So yeah, baby.
Do the math.
I don't mean to say it's not great, but for me, it was just, it was like, I think they were kind of right after doing the first one to go try and do something different, because it was charming and new, but the sequel was like, okay, more of the same.
It's like the Matrix movies. The first one was mind-blowing and has never been done, and then they tried to put substance and philosophy behind it in movies 2 and 3, and people just sort of said, no, stop it.
I have 2 closing the loop pieces from listeners. One guy, and this was important, well, to me at least, said, question regarding Squirrel. This is Jonathan Lloyd tweeted, how might a user share their credentials for a single site with someone else? Is this possible? He said, I ask because many websites don't have a robust permission system. I still need to send or receive login info at least a few times per year. In any case, I thought I'd ask. I don't recall hearing this mentioned on SN before. Love the show. I try not to miss an episode. That's a great question, and we've addressed it. The problem is, what if multiple people need access to a single site? The way it's done today, as we all know, is, hey, what's your password? Well, could anything be less secure than that? The point is, because the binding of identity is weak in our current internet ecosystem, the weak identity binding allows a person to share their weak identity, which is just represented as a username and password, with someone else, who then is able to essentially impersonate them to that website. Well, Squirrel identity binding is tight. It's the reverse of weak. I mean, and in fact, a Squirrel identity cannot be shared without sharing all of your Squirrel identity. That is, it is something you cannot share. So part of the Squirrel specification, it isn't a requirement, but it strongly urges what we call a many-to-one mapping, meaning that when a site brings up Squirrel support, specifically because Squirrel does not allow people to share identities in the same way that people can share passwords, what we're encouraging any site that supports Squirrel to do is to allow multiple Squirrel identities to be associated with an online account, so that mom and dad, for example, can both use their individual Squirrel identities to share access to their banking account, or mom and dad and the kids can all share access to, legoland.com or something. And the idea is that you would have a couple users who would be admin or privileged, and some other users who would be guest users, and so that it would be the privileged users that would be able to invite other users to join with their Squirrel account. And we worked out all the protocols and all of the handshake. So the point is, because Squirrel's identity binding is so tight, I mean, it really is you, then the way sites have supported a non-many-to-one mapping is like, well, okay, just give them your username and password. Well, Squirrel fights strongly against that. So instead, we're going to strongly encourage Squirrel supporting sites to offer many-to-one identity mapping. And I think it's not just Squirrel. Sites ought to be doing this. And get with the plan, because asking people to disclose their identities to others is fundamentally insecure and really bad security practice.
Right. This is part of that. The people training is part of any new technology or process. People have to understand this doesn't work like it did when you could give someone your username and password and they could get in as you. This is you. Correct. You cannot share this part of yourself. Correct. Okay.
And lastly, Carl Green tweeted, he said, regarding travel mode for 1Password manager, he said, question, can it be n/disabled, meaning enabled or disabled, from your iPhone? Seems to me they would ask you to do that. And the answer is, well, no. We talked about 1Password's brilliant travel mode, where you divide your secrets into vaults, and then vaults can be individually tagged as safe for travel or not. And then before embarking on travel, before you're going to go through customs or approach the mean-looking, or as I said to Leo, the officious-looking TSA agent, you're able to go to the 1password.com site, and you log in there, and then you activate travel mode. And what happens then is all of your 1Password enabled devices everywhere have the vaults tagged as not safe for travel deleted. So the point is, they did this right. They made the control of travel mode out of band, as in not something that the 1Password app itself has any awareness or knowledge or visibility of. So there is no way for anyone looking at it to know that you are in travel mode or that you have enabled travel mode. All they see is a subset of your secrets, those that you have explicitly allowed them to see. So great question, Carl. And again, 1Password did it right.
Steve, I might be mistaken here, but it seems that we've actually gotten to the end of your notes. I don't think we've ever done that in an episode that's been you and me. We typically stretch things out a lot.
Well, actually, I scaled this podcast for the two of us, Padre.
You don't have to pack it quite as full, because I love engaging you about these things, because
I'll tell you, from the feedback I get from our listeners, they really enjoy you co-hosting. So
I take delight in this.
Thank you very much.
Again, I love working with Leo. I will work with him as long as I will let me work with him. However, I do enjoy when he goes away on vacation, because it means I get to sit down with you for a couple of hours. And
I did hear he's got 3 or 6 vacations planned for this year.
Oh, so I will be down with that then.
I think we'll be seeing more of you.
Fantastic. Folks, that does it for this episode of Security Now. Now, don't forget that we are live here on the Twit TV network every Tuesday at 13:30 Pacific time. Now, Steve will always be here to inject you with the latest serum that will inoculate you from the security threats of the day, or at least to give you that healthy paranoia that we talked about at the top of the show. Don't forget, you can find all of our shows at the show page at twit.tv/SN, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts are found. You can also get high-definition, high-resolution audio versions of the show at grc.com, which is also where you will find everything about GRC, Spinrite, Shields Up, and of course, Squirrel. Until next time, I am Father Robert Balaser. This man right here is, I'm going to call him Dr. Steve Gibson, Professor Steve, Emperor Steve Gibson. And until next time, if you need to think about security, you need to think about Security Now.
Security Now.